morning, Green Spring. Today is Friday, March 8th. It is International Women's Day, and it is also National Reading Month in the U.S. So for that reason, we have decided to do a special program today. It's a little different format. We are experimenting a little bit. And because it is a National Reading Month, I brought several books that I want to introduce to you by women authors. And the first one is by Janelle Beck. She is from my home country, Germany. She is lauded as one of the most interesting, versatile, successful young writers in Europe. And her latest novel is called Go, Went, Gone. I picked it because it is contemporary fiction. It is really interesting in that the story deals with a retired person, something we can relate to. A professor in Berlin who recently lost his wife and now he's retiring. He has to retire. So he needs to find new meaning in his life and is looking for purpose. And as he wanders the streets of Berlin, he comes upon recent immigrants. And that, of course, is an important topic for many of us to think about and to marinate on in these days. And so the book describes how his preconceived notions change as he meets real people from different countries, and it also tells stories from their perspective, how interesting, challenging, difficult, heart-wrenching, exciting it is to be thrown into a different country where you don't know the customs and you don't know the language and everything is a struggle. And it's beautifully written and it's also very well translated. So I recommend Go, Went, Gone by Janelle Beck as my first book. And now we have a guest. Janelle Cesari is here. You know her as the Community Resources Coordinator down here in Village Square. And today she is here to introduce what? Whom?
I'm going to talk about a book that had a lot of meaning for me. I read it about 10 years ago. It's called Eat, Pray, Love.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Many people know that book because it was also a movie. The book sold millions of copies, and it was on the bestseller list for 200 weeks. I believe it came out in 2006.
And who's the author?
Elizabeth Gilbert is the author, and she's gone on to write other things. I read this book about 10 years ago, and I was kind of in a weird place in my life, questioning my happiness and questioning what I wanted to do with my life. Everything, kind of like an early midlife crisis, I guess. And when I read this book, it really reverberated, it really touched a part of my soul, and I think it did for many, many other women too.
Were you around 40?
Yes.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah. So the book was called Eat, Pray, Love, One Woman's Search for Everything by Elizabeth Gilbert. And Elizabeth Gilbert happens to be born in the same year as I am. So we are very similar in terms of our generation. So I think that's another reason why she was very contemporary for me. Many people have probably read it. It's an eloquent account of her pursuit of worldly pleasure, spiritual devotion, and the purpose. It's a memoir of self-discovery. So basically, Elizabeth Gilbert, this is an autobiographical story. She went through a very bitter divorce in her late 30s and was trying to cope with her feelings, all these awful feelings that she had of guilt and confusion and sadness. So what she decided to do, and I think this is what really touched me at the time, was to pursue her own happiness and not worry about fitting into the conventions of societal expectations. One of the issues with her was her husband wanted to have children and she didn't. Now, I don't have children either, and fortunately for me, my husband and I were always on the same page about that. But I have felt, I get a lot of questions myself about why didn't I ever want children. It was a personal choice. So like I said, this sort of struggle in questioning that issue was really something that was close to my heart.
Yeah.
So
and you have to be a certain age to allow yourself to pursue happiness that may not be along traditional tracks, or at least questioning it.
Yes, and as you get a little older, you one of the things that's very liberating as a woman, as I'm sure you know, is you start to not worry so much
Yes.
about what society thinks of you. And that's kind of like what this book is about. And one of the reasons why I loved the book is I have a culinary background also, and she travels to find her happiness. She travels alone around the world,
Ooh.
which is something I've always wanted to do. That's on my bucket list. And the first place she goes is Italy, the land of romance and food. And she's very eloquent in her descriptions of the very sensual descriptions of really enjoying her food and not worrying about how fat she's going to get or what people think or anything. So she goes to Italy, and it's just the sensuous land. And then she goes to Italy, and then she goes to she goes to Italy and then India and Indonesia. And so those other journeys are more spiritual for her. But what I wanted to read a few quotes from the book before I close is all of the quotes that she had about happiness. And these are the things that really stuck with me and still stick with me. So the themes of happiness, she says, quote, "You need to learn how to select your thoughts just the same way you select your clothes every day. This is a power you can cultivate. If you want to control things in your life so bad, work on your mind. That's the only thing you should be trying to control." Another quote about happiness that I kept on my refrigerator for a long time when I was going through a bad time in my life. "Happiness is the consequence of personal effort. You fight for it, strive for it, insist upon it, and sometimes even travel around the world looking for it. You have to participate relentlessly in the manifestations of your own blessings. And once you have achieved a state of happiness, you must never become lax about maintaining it. Yeah. You must make a mighty effort to keep swimming upward into that happiness forever, to stay afloat on top of it."
Beautiful.
So that is a book, like I said, Eat, Pray, Love. If you haven't read it, most people have read it, but if you haven't read it, I highly suggest it. For a man or a woman, it's very enlightening.
I'm sure it's in the public library at this stage.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's so well known. Before I let you go, I would like to ask you, when you grew up, did you know about International Women's Day? Did you
I
celebrate
never heard
it?
about it, believe it or not, until 2 years ago.
Huh.
And, I always considered myself somewhat of a feminist.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just, I felt like it wasn't really out in the media as much as it is.
Not in this country.
Yeah,
That's certainly true. Yeah. It actually was first mentioned and brought up in 1905 at a women's congress in Germany. That's why I know about it, because it has more to do with German history.
Yeah.
And then they started celebrating in 1910.
Okay.
So anyway,
that's really
thank you very much
Thank you.
for coming and sharing this with us.
Thank you, Elke.
And now it's time for my second book suggestion, and that is by Hilde Bernstein. Hilde Bernstein is the wife of Rusty Bernstein, who was one of the human rights fighters in South Africa during the time of apartheid. He was jailed with Nelson Mandela, fought with Nelson Mandela, and he and his wife together fought. And this is a memoir of hers, talking about their lives together in South Africa under the apartheid regime, and then their struggle between creating an everyday life that was appropriate and enjoyable to raise children at the same time as they wanted to continue their fight for what they thought was right. And then their dangerous escape out of South Africa and their life in exile in London. So and not only is it a memoir that somebody wrote who had an interesting life, but she was also a writer in her own right, and so it's really great to read. It's a great read. Did I ever tell you the title of the book? The World That Was Ours. That's what she writes about. And I also wanted to point out the cover is all silver, not by accident, but because I found this book in a little store in London where I was recently, by a woman's press called Persephone Books. Google that. It's really interesting. They are making an effort to bringing women's works that are old, so the copyright has expired, bringing that back to a wider audience, books from the 1600s through now. They all are covered in silver cover, and then on the inside they come up with these beautiful inside covers, and the bookmark is the same. Isn't that beautiful? Anyway, Hilde Bernstein, The World That Was Ours. Really interesting read about the world, living as a white person in South Africa during the time of apartheid and the struggles they had to go through. Now it's time for my next guest, and who is it other than Diane Havinga? We know you.
Hey, Elke, thank you so much. I just have to say that I am just honored to be on the show with the woman that we have here, and of course those in the studio on this very important International Women's Day. I couldn't think of a better group of people I would want to share.
Oh, thank you. That's wonderful. And thank you to all the women and men behind the scenes who make it work.
Exactly. So when we came up with this idea, I was trying to figure out, okay, what book am I going to celebrate, or author? And I had one that immediately came to me, and I went, well, that's a little dark. So then I went through my library, and as you know, I've downsized over the years. So I only have a few books versus a lot of books. So they're the ones I kept. And when I immediately came up with Fried Green Tomatoes, and I went, that's the book that I want to celebrate, by Fannie Flagg. She is a comedian. A lot of people know her because there was a game called The Match Game, and she was a contestant, one of the primary contestants on that game show in the 70s. But she has written several novels. One, of course, is Fried Green Tomatoes, which she was nominated for the Screenwrite Award for the Academy Awards when the movie came out. So it's not only a wonderful book, but it's like one of my favorite all-time movies, filled with lots of wonderful women actors.
And it's a movie, if I recollect, even though it has a serious theme, you have a lot to laugh about, which is not often enough that we do that.
Right.
I find these days.
And the book,
fabulous movie. Yeah.
And the book came out in 1986. The movie followed a few years later. So I'm actually going to read an excerpt from the book. And just to kind of set the scene, there are two women protagonists that this scene talks about, who are living together. Edgy, who is kind of a tomboy, continued to be a tomboy, and Ruth. And they live with their son. This scene takes place on June 3rd, 1946. It's the Wagon Wheel Fishing Lodge and River Club, Warrior River, Alabama. The blue lights were on, and you could hear the people inside carrying on, and the jukebox blaring all the way across the river. Edgy was sitting right in the middle of it, drinking Pabst Blue Ribbon beer, and chasing it with more Pabst Blue Ribbon beer. She was off whiskey for the night because the night before had been enough. Her friend Eva was whooping it up with some country boys that were supposed to be at the Elks Club meeting that night over at Gate City. She passed by Edgy and looked at her. Good God, girl, what's the matter with you? You look like a lizard with a hangover. Hank Williams was singing his heart out about how he was so lonesome he could die. Edgy said, Ruth moved out. Eva's mood changed. What? Moved out, went over to Cleo and Nanny's house. Eva sat down. Well, good Lord, Edgy, why did she do that? She's mad at me. I figured that, but what did you do? I lied to her. What did you say? I told her I was going to Atlanta to see my sister Leanna and John. Didn't you go? No. Where did you go? Out in the woods. With who? By myself. I just wanted to be by myself. That's all. Why didn't you tell her? I don't know. I guess I just kind of got mad at having to tell somebody where I am all the time. I don't know. I was beginning to feel kind of trapped. Like I needed to get out for a while. So I lied. That's all. What's the big deal? Grady lies to Gladys and Jack lies to Mazel. Yeah, but now, honey, you ain't Grady or Jack. And Ruth ain't Gladys or Mazel either. Oh, Lord, girl, I hate to see this happen. Don't you remember the fits you had while having, until she came over here? Yeah, but sometimes I just need to take it off for a while. I feel like I need my freedom, you know? Of course I know, Edgy, but you got to look at this thing from her point of view. That girl gave up everything she had to come over here. She left her hometown and all her friends, gave up all she had just to be here and make a life for you. You and Stump are all she has. You've got all your friends and your family. Yeah, well, sometimes I think like they like her better than me. You listen, Edgy. I'm going to tell you something. Don't you think she couldn't have had anybody she wanted around here? All she'd have to do is snap her fingers. So I'd think long and hard before I go flying off. At that moment, Helen Claypole, a woman of about 50 who's been hanging around the River Club for years, picking up men and drinking with anything that moved, who would buy her drinks, came out of the bathroom, so drunk that she had stuffed the back of her dress in her panties
Oops.
and was staggering to her table where the men were waiting for her. Eva pointed to her. Now there's a woman who's got her freedom. Nobody gives a shit where she is, and ain't nobody's checking up on her. You can be damn sure of that. Edgy watched Helen. Pretty soon Edgy said, I guess I'll go. Gotta think this thing out. Yeah, well, I thought you might. 2 days later, Ruth received a neatly typed note, and it said, if you cage a wild thing, you can be sure it will die. But if you let it run free, 9 times out of 10, it will come back home. Ruth called Edgy for the first time in 3 weeks. I got your note, and I've been thinking, maybe we should at least talk? Edgy was thrilled. I think that would be great. I'll be right over. And started out the door, planning to swear on a stack of Bibles in front of Reverend Skutton's house if she had to, that she would never lie to Ruth again. As she turned the corner and saw Cleo and Nanny's house, something Ruth had said dawned on her. What note? She hadn't sent any note.
Fabulous. Thank you so much.
You're more than welcome.
I do remember particularly the end of that movie, Secrets in the Sauce.
Yes, it is. It's a great book, a great movie. I highly recommend it.
Thank you, Diane. Now, before you go, same question to you. When you grew up, did you know about International Women's Day? Did anybody celebrate anything?
I don't think we did. I really don't think we did.
When did it come into your consciousness?
I'm thinking the last 5-6 years more so than, I think the media, the national media.
Yeah.
But yeah, up until that point, nope.
Okay. Well, thanks again.
You're welcome.
And as you can imagine, it is now time for my third book suggestion. I recently came across this book in the public library by Janet Beard. It is called The Atomic City Girls. Different genre. It's historic fiction, recent history, as you might imagine when it says Atomic City in the title. It is about Oak Ridge, Tennessee, in the days of World War II, when Oak Ridge was made into a closed city, NATO wire and everything around it, so people who lived inside couldn't get out and people on the outside couldn't get in. It was all very secretive, of course, because it had to do with the development of the nuclear bomb. And this book particularly focuses on the lives of young women who came from all over the country, pretty naive, very young, very uneducated, but they found jobs in Oak Ridge, and they got a different taste of life there. It's entertaining, it's well written, and it also, of course, has some historic facts that you may not have known before. So, The Atomic City Girls by Janet Beard, my third recommendation. And now, guess what? We have another guest. Hello, Sue.
Morning, Elke.
This is Sue Franke. You know her, of course, one of our social workers, and you're called something different now.
Resident Services
Coordinator. In
Yes.
any case, you are here today to celebrate with us International Women's Day
I am.
and National Reading Month, so thank you very much. When you were younger, did you know about International Women's Day?
I did not, I hate to say. It's been something that's only been within the last 5 to 10 years that I think I've been made aware of.
Yeah, I think that's not an unusual answer for this country.
Yes, definitely.
But there we are, finally.
But it sounds like in other countries it has been a lot more prevalent.
Indeed, yes,
So I'm
yeah.
glad that they've brought it over to the United States so that we can honor women that have really
Right,
pushed literacy.
and join in, you know,
Yes,
it really is a
absolutely.
worldwide celebration. So.
And I'm going to take a little different tact.
Uh-huh.
I am going to talk about Barbara Bush.
Uh-huh. Why did you
Somebody
pick her?
that has been my mentor,
Oh.
just in terms of her whole take on life, her way of just dealing with life as it comes, her love of family, but also Barbara Bush was an accomplished author. She also launched the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy in 1989.
Yes.
So she has really pushed to have education for not only children that might not have gotten it because of circumstances, but also for parents of children, with the understanding that if parents can't read and can't help their children, then it makes it difficult for children to be able to read. And if children can't read, then they can't take advantage of all the wonderful books that we have. So really, Barbara fostered this whole notion of helping children from the very earliest ages to be able to grow up and enjoy literature.
And helping the parents, so she really was supporting several generations.
Yes, and her
Yeah,
foundation
beautiful.
has really taken off. It's been involved in so many different efforts throughout the country to be able to foster children, to be able to learn to read in a family group setting.
Yeah.
And I had an opportunity to meet her and to be a part of her life, which she was in the White House from 1989 to 1993 when her husband was president.
Right.
I was in the Marine Band at the time, and so the orchestra used to go very frequently to play for parties and receptions. And the feeling in the White House during that time was just a large feeling of family and family support. On Inauguration Day, we were there after the inauguration parade, and the whole family came into the White House and just sort of settled in. And Barbara and George embraced their family, and so just that feeling of family too. So what I'd like to do is just read some of what I love to think about as Barbara's pearls of wisdom. She was known to have the pearls around her neck. So on literacy, the American dream is about equal opportunity for everyone who works hard. If you don't give everyone the ability to simply read and write, then we aren't giving everyone an equal chance to succeed. She had a number of different thoughts on life. Whether you are talking about education, career, or service, you are talking about life. And life must really have joy. It's supposed to be fun. Cherish your human connections, your relationships with friends and family. Here's one I really like. At the end of your life, you will never regret not having passed one more test, not winning one more verdict, or not closing one more deal. You will regret not spent time with a husband, a friend, a child, or a parent.
Yes.
She had a very interesting quote on aging. I love this. Never ask anyone over 70 how they feel. They'll tell you.
Don't we know?
Isn't that? Yes, I just thought that was so good.
Yeah,
So,
that is wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Sue, for bringing that to us.
Thank you,
That is
Elke.
wonderful. And thank you for ending with such a joyful quote that most of us can relate to.
yes,
Well, happy International Women's Day. And now I am going to end with reading a poem to you by one of my favorite poets, contemporary Marge Piercy. I also brought Mary Oliver's book here. It's set as a decoration in the background. She recently died, and we want to pay tribute to her because she was one of the very few poets, and female poets at that, who was famous during her lifetime and sold books and could live off that during her lifetime. Anyway, Marge Piercy wrote many things, novels and poems, and this one is called What Are Big Girls Made Of? The construction of a woman. A woman is not made of flesh, of bone and sinew, belly and breasts, elbows and liver and toe. She is manufactured like a sports sedan. She's retooled, refitted, and redesigned every decade. Cecile had been seduction itself in college. She wriggled through bars like a satin eel, her hips and ass promising, her mouth pursed in the dark red lipstick of desire. She visited in '68, still wearing skirts tight to the knees, dark red lipstick, while I danced through Manhattan in miniskirt, lipstick pale as apricot milk, hair loose as a horse's mane. Oh dear, I thought in my superiority of the moment. Whatever has happened to poor Cecile? She was out of fashion, out of the game, disqualified, disdained, dismembered from the club of desire. Look at pictures in French fashion magazines of the 18th century of the ultimate lady fantasy wrought of silk and corseting. Panniers bring her hips out 3 feet each way, while the waist is pinched and the belly flattened under wood. The breasts are stuffed up and out, offered like apples in a bowl. The tiny foot is encased in a slipper never meant for walking. On top is a grandiose headache, hair like a museum piece, daily ornamented in ribbons, vases, grottos, mountains, frigates in full sail, balloons, baboons, the fancy of a hairdresser turned loose. The hats were Rococo wedding cakes that would dim the Las Vegas Strip. Here is a woman forced into shape, rigid exoskeleton torturing flesh. A woman made of pain. How superior we are now. See the modern woman, thin as a blade of scissors. She runs on a treadmill every morning, fits herself into machines of weights and pulleys to heave and grunt, an image in her mind she can never approximate. A body of rosy glass that never wrinkles, never grows, never fades. She sits at the table, closing her eyes to food. Hungry, always hungry. A woman made of pain. A cat or a dog approaches another. They sniff noses, they sniff asses, they bristle or lick. They fall in love as often as we do, as passionately. But they fall in love or lust with furry flesh, not hoop skirts and push-up bras, rib removal or liposuction. It is not for male or female dogs that poodles are clipped into topiary hedges. If only we could like each other raw. If only we could love ourselves like healthy babies burbling in our arms. If only we were not programmed and reprogrammed to need what is sold us. Why should we want to live inside ads? Why should we want to scourge our softness to straight lines like a Mondrian painting? Why should we punish each other with scorn, as if to have a large ass were worse than being greedy or mean? When will women not be compelled to view their bodies as science projects, gardens to be weeded, dogs to be trained? When will a woman cease to be made of pain? That was Marge Piercy, and this concludes our special show for the International Women's Day and National Reading Month, Friday, March 8th. Shabbat Shalom to those of you who celebrate, Have a meaningful Lent to those of you who observe, and to everybody, have a great weekend.